Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to continue with Daniel. Tonight we're going to be looking at Daniel Zion, Daniel 7. And this is a very important and interesting chapter. It's our first, what we could consider like an apocalyptic chapter, right? Not super apocalyptic, obviously. It just means kind of like an end time chapter, right? A chapter that's supposed to be a vision of the end times, the vision of the kingdoms going up to the end time and this kind of messianic age, right? Which is going to be very, very important in this second half of the book. It's our last chapter of Aramaic. So this is the last time you're going to hear me and my Aramaic pronunciation. Next week, we're back to Hebrew. And so that'll be exciting for us all. And it's interesting because on the one hand, this is a chapter in Aramaic, like the previous chapters. On the other hand, it's the first of the visions that are going to really center on or lead up to the decrees of Antiochus and the hope, the Jewish hope for a messianic age to follow, right? And we're going to say, and there are, I just want to say that, of course, there's been a rich tradition of ripping this chapter apart into little shreds so you can give earlier dates to some pieces and later dates to other pieces. I'm not going to be following that tradition. Luckily enough, I do have academics on whom to rely. If you look at Collins did the Hermeneia volume on Daniel and does a nice job of showing why it makes sense to look at this chapter as a complete chapter while acknowledging previous research and previous attempts to kind of take different pieces of it apart. Essentially, there was kind of a desire to make parts of the chapter earlier. As soon as you have the noisy little horn that we're going to read about, you've got to date it to after Antiochus Epiphanes. Another thing that I want to talk about is in terms of interpreting this chapter. And when we talk about when we're interpreting these chapters and we're looking at the different kingdoms, different animals, right, and what these animals signify, there's a real break between modern scholarship and traditional scholarship. And we're going to talk about both. Why? Because for traditional scholarship, it was for traditional interpreters, Jewish and Christian, by the way, it was super important to read this as having the fourth animal be the present day, right? And we'll dive into the text now, and you'll see what I mean. But we're going to look at both as we continue. So, all right. So here we have Daniel chapter 7, and you'll notice right away that we're actually going back in time, right? Because we were fully in the Persian kingdom, and now we're going to go back to Belshazzar of Babylonia. Okay. Bishnat Chada Belshazzar Melech Bavel Daniel Chelem Chaza B'chazvei Reishei Al Mishkevei Beidayin Chel Maktav Reish Milin Amar. So in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylonia, remember we talked before about what Belshazzar what his role was historically, actually. Daniel dreamed a dream, and he had visions in bed. Now here, actually, one of the things that we should note the parallel to is chapter 2. So if we look at chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has dreams, and those dreams involve this statue that symbolizes the four kingdoms. Okay, and this is all revealed to him in a dream. This chapter of Daniel is the one apocalypse that he sees as a dream. He has visions, right? But in this one, it's emphasized that it's a dream, possibly to link it to that previous vision of a dream of Nebuchadnezzar's, which again is about four kingdoms. So Anei Daniel V'amar, and then Daniel kind of announces and says, Chazei Havet Bechazvi Imlelia. And it's also interesting because he doesn't really have anyone to say it to, right? He's not a king, but he's saying it to us, right? So he's announcing and telling us that I had a dream, Bechazvi Imlelia, when I saw my vision by Chazei Havet Bechazvi Imlelia. I saw a vision in my vision at night. Va'aru Arba Ruchei Shmayam B'gichan Leyam Araba. Okay, so there are four winds of heaven or directions. We'll talk about the possibility in terms of directions later, that broke out on the sea. Oh, did I remember? Oh, yeah, it's recording. Okay. So you had 4 great animals coming out of the sea that were different from each other. Now, why the sea, right? Why the sea? So very possibly we have this, of course, in Ugaritic. It's interesting because on the one hand, we have this in the biblical tradition. So if we look at, and now let me see if I have the right, if we look at Eov at Joe, actually, you know what the best place is? The best place is Psalms, but in general, that's considered later. If we look at Eov, let me get the right chapter. Because this kind of, I like this because it kind of gives me gives us the basics. Here we are. So this idea that God fights this, that God overcomes the sea, right? And the sea is this kind of chaotic force, right? So we have and this is the idea of God kind of squelching these kind of chaotic forces, right? With his strength, you could say he calms the sea. This is translating it as he stirs up the sea, and with his wisdom, he smites Rahav, which is this kind of also force of nature, right, that causes harm, right? Birucho shamayim shifra, cholalai adon nachash bariach. Right, so he commands the heavens. He makes the heaven. He calms the heavens, but he also kind of smites the serpent. What is the serpent? The serpent is the Leviathan, kind of that ancient sea serpent. Right now we have this idea. This idea exists more in the area of Canaan than it does in. It's more pronounced in what we know of Ugaritic poetry. And I see a comment, I'll get to it in just a second, where we have this idea that Yam is this force that tries to, that Baal overcomes and is then crowned king, right? By the upper god, right? El. So upper god El crowns Baal king when he overcomes sea. Right. And this idea is that the sea is kind of a chaotic force that needs to be contained. But we see this throughout biblical texts as well. We see it in Eov, we see it in Yeshayahu and Isaiah. And so and it's not not that unusual to us. We see it here. I'm going to look at Mizmor, this parak of this chapter of Tehillim, of Psalms, Psalm 89, right? And here you have a longer poem talking about and kind of almost developing that what we saw in Eov. I wouldn't say it's necessarily taking those specific verses in Eov and developing them, but it's saying, you rule the heights of the sea, the waves, the kind of the waves, the tide of the sea. Beso galav ata tishabchem, right? When the waves go up, you control them, right? Ata dikita kechalal rahav bizra uzcha pizarta ovecha. You subdued, right? Rahav. Right. Again, that kind of natural destructive force, and with your and obviously the name Rahav probably does, like, at least for some people, probably they interpret it as demonic, right? So and with the strength of your arm, you scattered your enemies, right? The idea that God subdues nature is kind of a but particularly the nature that's beyond the cultivated. Right? When we're talking about the sea and, the idea that you can't control the sea, a person cannot control the sea, a king cannot control the sea. This is far beyond his control. God can control the sea, right? But it's also this idea of order versus chaos, right? So we see that here, this idea of these animals coming out from the sea in Daniel, which some have connected to the Ugaritic stuff. We don't have to really go that far back. We can just look at these biblical texts where that's part of it, right? So these big, these monstrous beasts are coming out of the sea. Kadmaita Arye Vigapin Dina Sharla, right? So this one, the first one, is like a lion and it has eagle's wings. Now, as you are probably familiar, this is a motif we find in Assyrian art, especially. Not, by the way, if we think about the ones in the British Museum with those are the ones that have a human head. That wouldn't be this, right? This is a regular lion with eagle wings or falcon wings. We would actually call them, I would actually think we could say eagle wings. I know that today they're in the vulture family, the words that we use nesher for. At any rate, Chazeh havet ad dimaritu gapa unitilat min ar'a va'al raglaim ke'anash hakimat ulevav enash yehivla. So, and I watched it till its wings were plucked off, and miritu really does mean they were torn off, right? And it was lifted up from the earth, and it was set on its feet like a person, and it was given the heart of a man. What does that mean, the heart of a man? I believe it's Rashi who says now he's like a man, he's fearful. It's a measure of weakness. They became weak, right? It's hard to know, it's hard to interpret. We'll see what the interpretation is. There's an additional interpretation at the end of the chapter, but if we continue looking, okay, and the next one comes an animal that looks like a bear, vilistar chad hakimat, and it goes up on one side, right? What is the one side? So I read one in modern interpretations like, well, it doesn't make sense for it to go up on one side. Maybe it means it went up on its legs, right? It seems to be, here's where we get. So so what are these kingdoms? It's not going to tell us who the kingdoms are. We're going to have to figure this out on our own, right? So who are the kingdoms? We're going to have 4 kingdoms, all right? In the tradition, what are the kingdoms? The kingdoms are going to be the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians. Wait, am I going to do this right? The Babylonians. Now I'm going to get it wrong. The Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians. No, that doesn't work. We have, so this is the thing, okay? So do we have Babylonians, Medes, and Persians and Greeks, or are the Medes and the Persians together, right? So let's take a look, okay? All right, so if we say that this first one, right? If we say the first one is, or actually no, because we could say, okay, so we could say that this first one is the Babylonians, right? Then the next ones have to be the Persians, okay? Traditionally, in fact, they talk about them as the Persians. In the Gemara, it says in Masechet Megillah, Persians are like bears, they're hairy like, it says all sorts of nasty things about Persians. They eat like bears, they move around like bears. That's why they're bears, right? We shouldn't be surprised when we see a lion, a bear, and then afterwards we're going to see a leopard. These are traditionally scary, dangerous, man-endangering animals in this area of the world. And we see it throughout biblical literature. These are animals that kill you, right? Not just for shepherds, for anyone. So we're starting with a lion for Babylonia, and then we go on to the bear, okay? And the bear has utlat il, so he goes up on one side. So one of the theories is that the one side is Darius the Mede. In other words, you have the Persians, and then you have kind of Darius the Mede is like the thing on the side, right? Utlat il in befuma, and three ribs in its mouth, bein shina, between its teeth. The question is, are these 3 ribs indicative of anything? They could be the 3 Babylonian kings who have been named, Nebuchadnezzar, Evil-Merodach, and Belshazzar, right? In other words, from this point of view of this book, there are 3 Babylonian kings, and this is them, Persia's eating them up, right? That's a possibility. Another possibility is just showing that he's eating stuff up, right? And they say to her, come eat a lot of meat. In other words, be ravenous. That's right, you go, right? Batar dina chazeh havet, va'aru achari kinmar, v'lagapin arba diof al gaba, v'arba'a reshin lechevta, v'shaltan yehivla. After this, I saw, and there was another one like a leopard, right? And this had four bird wings, right, on its back, and it had 4 heads, and it ruled. Okay, so what are the 4 heads? So if this is the Greeks, right, then you would say this is a reference to the Diadochi, right? Or Diadochi, right? If it's the Persians and the previous one was the Medes, right, then you could say that 4 heads are the 4 directions of the earth, because it really controlled, the Persians really controlled everyone. And you do have that language of leopards. Leopards are fast, and the Persians were described as conquering very quickly and also moving very quickly. Okay, but now we come to the important animal, all right? Batar dina chazeh havet b'chezvei le'elia. And then I saw in the visions of the night, va'aru cheva revi'a'a dechila ve'emtani v'takifa yatira v'shinayin tifarzel la ravriva. And a 4th animal that was a fearful, a really scary animal, and with tremendous power, and with many iron teeth, right, eating and grinding, right, and also trampling with its feet. In other words, it's just destroying everything. Okay, v'hi mishanya min kol chayvata dikadama v'karnayin asarla. All right, and it was different from all the animals before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, who are the 10 horns? So in modern interpretation, right, this is going to be the Seleucids. All right, why the Seleucids? Bear with me. Okay, let's meet our little horn. Okay, mistakal havet bekarnaya, right? So I was looking at these horns, right? Va'alu karen achari ze'era silke beinehon, and this little horn came up among them. Utlat min karnaya kadmayata et akra min kadama, and it uprooted 3 of those horns. Va'alu ainin kaine anasha bekarnada ufum memalil ravrivan, right? And it had eyes, human eyes, this little horn, and a mouth that really spoke and talked a lot. And it seems like it talked in a kind of a chutzpahdik way. It talked like, yeah, look at me, hey, I'm a horn, right? Okay, so I don't think it's saying I'm a horn, but like I've gotten to the limits of my imagination of what a horn would say, right? But it's talking, all right? Chazeh havet. Okay, so what's the situation? All right, you've got this 4th animal, all right, that's come up after the first 3 animals. This is a very scary animal. It's grinding everything in its teeth. What's left is trampling with its feet. It's got 10 horns. Comes this little horn, uproots 3 of the horns, and it's talking like crazy. All right, so I'll tell you already. Okay, so in traditional interpretation, this is going to be this, because this beast is going to be destroyed through the Messianic age, right? This beast has to be what we're living through now, right? So for Rashi, this beast is what's called Rome and Christendom, right? So for in general, this is something that's important, or Edom. You just call it Edom, and that's enough, right? So you call it Edom. Edom is Rome, which is Christendom. So you can go from the destruction from the conquest and destruction by Rome up through Christendom, and that whole thing can be the 4th beast. For Ibn Ezra, it's the Muslim Empire, right? Because Ibn Ezra was living most of his life under the Muslims, right? And he's seeing them as the main deal, right? So it's interesting. Later on, he takes a little bit of a step back, Ibn Ezra, and recognizes kind of, but yeah, so depending on what you lived in the Middle Ages was how you interpreted this beast, right? Because it's supposed to be and you'll see that it also is characterized by persecution of the Jews. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So here's this violent animal. Here's this horn that uprooted 3. Okay. All right. So I was watching until it says an ancient of days. Atik means some character who was ancient, was sitting. All right. Yilevushe kitlag chivar usar reshe kamar neke korseye shvivin dinur galgilohi nur dalik. Okay, so his clothing was white as snow. His hair was like clean wool. His throne was a flame was flames, right? Flames of fire. And the wheels, and this is important, it's on wheels, his throne. That's already telling us that who are we looking at? Almost certainly a guess. Who would be sitting in a fiery chariot? Not Eliyahu. I know you're going to say that. Not Eliyahu. It seems like it's God. It seems like it could be God. Now, is this God or isn't this God? Right? So Rashi goes ahead and interprets it as God. Right? Ibn Ezra, who of course is much later, right? But Ibn Ezra's like, this is the angel Michael, the angel Michael, right? He's ancient, and he is ancient, right? Because he's an angel. By the way, none of the angels get names except in Daniel. Just so you know, biblically, angels don't have names except in Daniel, right? In Daniel, they get names, right? We haven't seen it yet, but we will. Okay. And what we have here is a situation where there seems to be some anthropomorphism of God, right? Which is something that we usually avoid. Note that, and it really does seem like it on the one hand, it doesn't say a person. It doesn't even say like a person. Note that it doesn't, this character is not described as being a person or looking like a person. However, this person is given hair and clothing. So, or this character, I should say, is given hair and clothing. So it does come pretty close to a problematic image if this is supposed to be God, right? At the same time, it's hard to see it not being God, right? Given everything. Again, Ibn Ezra says it's an angel. You could read it as an angel, and you could even say it's clearly meant to be an angel because it would never have been written this way if it were supposed to be God. And you can make that argument. I think it's a valid argument, right? But let's continue. A river of fire was kind of flowing in front of him. Thousands ministered to him. That sounds like what served him. That sounds like thousands of angels, right? And hundreds of thousands were standing before him. Again, we're talking about angels, pretty much certainly. Okay, he set judgment and opened books. This, by the way, is a classic situation, the classic case, classic example that we have that's actually written biblically where books are opened in judgment. We're all used to this idea on Rosh Hashanah, right? That God opens the books and judges us, as it were, right? Opens the account books. This is where we see it biblically. Okay, it's very unusual to see this idea because remember that most of the Hebrew Bible, most of Tanakh doesn't tell us what's going on beyond this world. Okay. Because they have, and I'm gonna pause soon for questions. I know that I've been talking for a while without pausing, but I do want to get to a bit of a resting place here. חזה הבית בידיים מן קל מילאיה רבבתה, דיקרנה ממעלה, חזה הבית הדקתילת חבטה, והובד גשמה, והיבת לקדת אשה. So I looked, and this horn is talking big, right? And I watched until the animal was killed, wasn't just killed, its body is completely destroyed and burned up. Okay. And notice that the other animals have a slightly different fate. The other animals, their rulership was removed. In other words, this beast, the scary beast with the horn, was completely destroyed. The other animals, they aren't destroyed. They just don't rule. Okay. And their lives were prolonged until a future time. What is the future time? When everything's going to be like, kind of decided. חזה הבית בחזבי ליליה בערו עם ענני שמיה כבר אנש התהבה ועד עתיק יומיים מתה וכדמוהי הקריבוהי. Okay, so now he sees someone who looks like a man. Now we have someone who says, here's someone, now I saw someone who's like a man. Right? That Atik Yomin was not like a man. The Ancient of Days was not like a man. Now I see someone who's like a man. Okay, and he approaches the ancient being, right? And he's brought near. In other words, he's kind of, it seems like it's more like a royal thing, like he's allowed to kind of come before him. V'le yehiv shaltan vikar umachu v'chol amemaya umaya v'lishanaya le yiflechun. And to him was given rulership and honor and kingdom, and all the nations and tongues and groups, they're all going to all serve him. Shaltane shaltan alam dila ye'adei u'malchutei dila titchaba. His kingdom, his rulership is going to be forever. It's not going to be uprooted ever, and it will never be destroyed. Okay. End of vision. And now he's going to get a little bit of an interpretation. Okay. So the question is, okay, who's this like a person? Is it meant to be one person? Is it meant to be the nation of Israel? Right? So both of these interpretations, by the way, so in general, if we look at, if we look at earlier interpretations like Rashi or Sadia, or those, they're going to say it's Mashiach. They're going to say it's the Messiah, right? That is who it is. It's a person. Later on, we'll have interpreters like Ibn Ezra who will say this is the whole nation of Israel. Okay. Obviously, it's interesting. Actually, Christian interpretation does a similar thing, where early on they're like, okay, this is Jesus, and then later interpreters actually say, well, it was meant to be the nation of Israel. It's like the nation of Israel, but Jesus kind of took it on, right? So like, it's interesting that there's a movement on both sides actually to kind of, and I can't say how common a movement it was on the Christian side, right? To say, oh, maybe this is the nation of Israel, not meant to be one person. Okay, and we're going to discuss this more in a bit, as well as if we say, like, and we're going to talk a little bit soon. We're going to finish the chapter, and then we're going to come back to how everything gets explained as soon as you understand that last beast and that little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, right? That little horn is Antiochus IV, and that's why that beast has to be completely destroyed, because really the whole thing is about the situation that the Jews are living in, the Judeans particularly are living in during, in the period of the Antiochian decrees before the Maccabean revolt, right? Maybe even the beginning of the Maccabean revolt. So I'm going to pause here and take questions. I see there's already one comment or question. Okay. All right. Danny and Libby ask, more often than not, translations notwithstanding, Nesher, oh, thank you. We're telling Nesher means vulture, not eagle. That's right. So whenever they have a translation of Nesher, we're talking about the lion with the wings, with the eagle wings, quote unquote. So it's probably vulture wings. Like, we just don't say it because vultures get a bad rap, because we always think of the really ugly ones. So first of all, they're nicer looking vultures, and second, they don't have such a bad rap in in the Bible, like vulture. That is the big bird. If you've ever been, if you've ever been to a bird watching place, like especially I think a little bit up north, you can see you see these what's considered a nesher, which would be in the vulture family. They really are majestic when they fly, and they're huge and they're very impressive. So yeah. So thank you for that. Any questions before I continue?
Miriam, so if you take it at face value, then the horrible beast at the end, you say, is the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus, which is separate from the Greeks.
Okay, so you don't. It seems it's possible, or you can count the Medes as a totally. I'm trying to think again. If you count the Medes as completely separate, then the last one is the Greeks, and including the Seleucids.
Oh, okay.
Right. So or you can count the Seleucids, because this is the thing. So what are the 10 horns? So we're already talking about this. So what are the 10 horns? So one of the theories is, let me even look at my because I'm not gonna. Here we are. I'll tell you. There are, so the question is, so for example, what are the 3 uprooted horns? So Antiochus defeated Ptolemy the 6th Philometor, Ptolemy the 8th Euergetes, and Artaxerxes, king of Armenia, right? So those are 3 kings that he conquered, right? So they could be those 3. And then the Seleucids, we have the Seleucids, we've identified at least 7 of the 10. 7 being Seleucus the first, Antiochus the first and second, Seleucus the second and third, Antiochus the third, and Seleucus the fourth. So you can tell I just read that off somewhere, but but because I'm not going to remember that by heart. But so you could absolutely say, okay, this part is the Seleucids, right? Even though I know that if we're looking at the animals, I think in general, the modern interpretation prefers to see the bear as the Medes and then the leopard as the Persians. Because the leopard is fast and it seems to have a rule over the entire world. So that makes it more like the Persians, who had a tremendously huge empire and would have absolutely been considered as like an empire that spanned the world. And then have the last one essentially be the Greeks and the Seleucids.
So the bottom line is we really don't know what the author meant.
A surprise, right?
Yeah.
Right. But what we can talk, the fourth beast. Okay. So again, this is let's talk a little bit. I'm going to actually stop my share for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about the academic approach versus the traditional approach. Okay. So it's important to realize with academic, and I say this because sometimes I come up, sometimes I forget myself and I start talking like an academic with academic assumptions, and then I get in trouble because someone has different assumptions and they're like, how can you say that? So in general, when academically we have a text, let's say I find a text from Akkad and it says, King Mushu Mushu received this prophecy from the great prophet Seneth, right? And he says, King Mushu Mushu, this is what will happen in the coming years, right? So how do we date that prophecy, right? Unless it's like one of these little oracles, it's just someone saying, okay, you shall win, or they're trying to trick you, right? We've talked about that in a different class. But if it's like one of these long, epic kind of apocalyptic prophecies, we date it according to, we date it by the point up to which it is historically accurate. Like, let's say it says, King Mushu Mushu, you will meet a great enemy and you will defeat him, but then an even greater enemy will come along and he will defeat you. And they give enough details so we can say, okay, this prophecy wasn't given to King Mushu Mushu. Someone wrote this prophecy 100 years after King Mushu Mushu, wrote it as if it was said to King Mushu Mushu, right? So that it would look real, right? And we know when they wrote it because this is the part where the prophecy stops coming true. Because it's almost always this is the part where the apocalypse happens. Because usually the expectation is the big thing is going to happen soon or in a certain period, or else something great's going to happen now. But at any rate, that's usually how they date it, is up to the point where it stops coming true. Now, we know that now this has its clear limitations. So for example, if we look at Israelite prophecies, we have prophecies that don't come true. And we have prophecies that are acknowledged as not coming true almost immediately after they're said, right? We have, right, we've discussed this before. We have Chezkel, we have Yirmiyahu, we have Chezkel, especially saying, okay, I know that last chapter I said that Nebuchadnezzar was gonna conquer Sor and Sidon, but no, no, he didn't, right? So you have so you have an explanation that's saying, well, look, there apparently there were prophecies being said, that were real prophecies. In other words, they didn't know whether it was going to come true or not, and they wrote them down, and then they didn't come true. But that's a little bit different from what we're looking at now. We're looking more at these apocalyptic prophecies, right? So apocalyptic prophecies that do seem to be accurate up to a certain point, we usually start dating them to the point where the accuracy ends. Right now, in this case, we have a very clear case, and we haven't gotten up to there in the chapter quite yet, but we start actually really relating it to decrees, which seem to be very clear at decrees from Antiochus. Now, of course, to someone living in medieval Europe, these would not be clearly Antiochus, because there were very similar persecutions happening, for example, during the First Crusades, right? There are all sorts, and at other times, right? Throughout Jewish history, you'd have these persecutions happening. At the same time, in this case, it really does seem to be talking about Antiochus. It even gives them a 3-year lifespan. It's like these decrees are only going to last for 3 years, right? So if we look at the timeline, okay, so the decrees are in 167 BCE, and Antiochus dies in 164, right? So the fact that it talks about the decrees, it's like, and they're going to end in 3 years, right? That kind of indicates that there's a certain that's what they're talking about. These decrees that we know about in history, which happened in 167 and at least partially ended in 164, right? So and the Maccabean revolt. And if we say then. And then the question is, and it really is a question, is this man, this something like a man, supposed to be Israel, or is it supposed to be Yehuda the Maccabee, right? If it's supposed to be Yehuda the Maccabee, right? In other words, is it supposed to be, I should make it clearer, is it supposed to be a messianic figure? And if it's supposed to be a messianic figure, is it supposed to be someone specific? It doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be. Now let's continue with the chapter, because we'll get more information. We'll have more to discuss. Let me just check. Let me just check and see if there are any more comments. It looks like, so Robin was saying, can you say something about the two authorities? Robin, what do you mean? What do you mean by two authorities? You can write it if you don't want to say.
No, it's just that I did a whole semester at the Hebrew U where this chapter of Daniel was always quoted in relation to those people who said there was two authorities in heaven.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this is the story. Okay, you know what? Don't let me forget. I want to get the whole picture, and then we'll come back. The two authorities they're talking about are the ancient being and the thing like a person, right? Those are the two authorities they're talking about when they say that, right? And we'll talk a little bit about why. But let's finish the chapter and we'll come back. I'll come back to this. Okay, great. Let me share my screen once again. Okay. Okay. Okay, so, now, so we got to the end of the vision, right? At Kiryat Ruchia Nadanya, B'go Nidne, because Ve'reshi Yivhalu Nani. Right. So Daniel's spirit is pained, is distressed, right, inside his body, and he's scared from the visions of his head, Kirvet achad min kamaya. Now this is what's interesting. So we're like, oh, so he woke up, right? No. He's still having this vision. He is among the angels somehow, right? And why do I say this? Because he has to go to someone to interpret it. Who's he going to? Kirvet achad min kamaya, v'yatziva ev emine, right? So I came to someone who was standing there, and I asked him for the truth. I'll call it and all these things. V'amarli ufshar milai Yehodinani. So he said to me, and he gave me the interpretation of these things. Ilen chevata ravavata di'inin arba amalchin yichun minar. Right, so these great beasts, these four, they're four kings, right? Which are essentially four kingdoms that are going to rise up from the earth. V'kablun malchuta kadisha elyonin, v'achsinun malchuta ad alma bat alam almaya. Okay, but and this is where it gets a little bit weird. The holy ones on high will receive kingship, and the kingdom will be preserved forever. Okay. Now this is a little bit hard because usually Kadishay Elyonin means angels. That's usually what it means. And here it's hard to say that it's angels. Here you would have to say that it's the Jewish people, but it's a strange thing to call them. Right? Even if you look at Qumran, the community of Qumran had this idea that they were raised to pray with the angels. And in the Hodayot, which is a prayer that was composed by someone at Qumran, maybe more than one person, it talks about, and you, God, raised me to be among the angels. But I don't think they lose that distinction, that they're not angels. They're still not actually angels. But here it's hard to read it as being angels. But then I wanted to know the truth about this fourth beast, this fourth animal that was different from all the others. Techila Yatira, Shinadi Farsel, Betifradi Nachash, Achlamad Kausha, Arab Rafsa. It was really scary. It has teeth of iron. It has nails of brass or copper. It eats and grinds things up and tramples things with its feet. The Al-Karnaya Asar. He also wants to know the truth about the 10 horns. That are on his head, and that 3 of them fell. And the horn that had eyes, right, and had a mouth that was saying a lot or great things, right, and that looked larger than the other ones, this is the first we're hearing about that, but there I think there's an assumption that like it wasn't actually larger, but it looked larger maybe because it was in the beginning it sounded like it was small, right? So it was small, but it looked bigger, and that kind of goes along with it saying being boasty. Chazehavet v'karnadi ken avda karav im kadishin ve'achla lahon. And I looked, and here we're okay. Is it angels? So here. And I looked, and this horn went to battle with, let's say the angels. I'm going to come back to that, like with the holy ones, and it won. Okay, this horn went to battle with the holy ones, and it won. Adi ata atik yomaya v'dina yehiv l'kadishei elyonin, until the Ancient of Days came and sat in judgment over the holies of the holy ones of the Most High. Right, and the time came, and the kingdom was secured for the holy ones. Okay, so this is where it gets really hard. So, is what it's saying, right? And there are. Is it talking about a battle being fought on high that is parallel with the battle that's being fought on the ground between the Jews. And I'm saying Jews now, because in this period, let's face it, they're Jews, right? You're not Israelites, right? That at this point, we're talking about Jews in Judea, and they're fighting with Antiochus. They're rebelling against Antiochus, and you're going to see a little bit why it's so clear that it's Antiochus. They're fighting, and on high there's the battle of the angels, right, that are also fighting it, right? Or are we simply calling the Jews the holy ones? Are they simply the holy ones here? Okay. Okay, so he said, right. Ken Amar Chevtara. So what happened is that, just so you understand the kind of the sequence, it's a little weird, but Daniel's going back and kind of expanding on what he saw, because we didn't get the full picture before. And he's like, so I really wanted to know about this fourth beast, because there was this whole and the 10 horns and the 3 horns and the little horn, because that little horn went to fight and it was winning against the holy ones until essentially God intervened, right? So I really want to know about this. Okay, so what's the answer? Ken amar chevtar v'yaita malchu revi'at teve ba'ara ditishne min kol malchavata v'techu kol ara utidushina v'tadkina. Right. So he's like, yes, this fourth beast is going to be a fourth kingdom on the earth. That's going to be different from all the other kingdoms, like the same way that this animal was different from all the other animals. And it's going to devour the whole earth, and it's going to trample and chew it and essentially break it into small pieces. There's a better word for it than break it into pieces, but to pulverize it, and it's going to pulverize it, right? So it's gonna trample and pulverize the earth, and it's tremendously violent. V'karnaya asar mina malchuta asar malchin yukumu, and these 10 horns are 10 kings. V'acharan yukum acharehon v'hu yishne min kadamei utlatan malchin yahashbil. And afterwards, you're going to have another one that's different from the ones who came before him, and he's going to bring down 3 of them. Umilin litzad ila'ayim alil ulekadishe elyonin yivale. And he's going to speak words against the most high. The translation here of ila'a would be elyon, right? So to make it clear what that is, right? So if you said someone's speaking out against the elyon, it's clearly speaking out against God, right? Ulekadishe elyonin yivale, and he'll wear out, he'll kind of, I guess he'll wear down the holy ones of the Most High, or the Most High holy ones. V'yisbar lahashnaya zimnin vadat. Here we get to the stuff. Here we get to the decrees, and he'll intend to change the times, the seasons, and the law. V'yityahavun bidei adidan bidanin uflag idad. Right, and these and they will in fact be given. So he's going to want to change the times, the seasons. Seems like the holidays, like he's not going to allow them to celebrate the times the way they should, and the law, right? And he'll in fact be able to do this until a time and times and half a time. And there's a year and 2 more years and half a year, 3.5 years, 3.5 years. V'dina yitiv v'shaltanei ha'adon lashmada ulhovada ad sofa. Right, but he will sit in judgment. Or the judgment says the judgment will sit. I don't know. I think it means he's going to judgment. He will sit. That's what I think. And this horns rulership will be taken away, will be uprooted, will be torn away from him, to be destroyed and to be completely obliterated forever. Umalchuta v'shaltana urvuta dimachava techot kol shemaya yivat la'am kadishe elyonim. Okay, and here it's clear that it's talking about the Jews and not angels, and kingdom and dominion of all the kingdoms of heaven will be given to the nation of the holy of the holy ones, right? Malchute malchut alam v'chol shatanaya leif lechun v'ishtamun, right? All the kingdom is going to be a kingdom that lasts forever, and all the rulerships, he says all the dominions, it's pretty good, will serve and obey them. Ad ka sofa di milta ana Daniel sagi rayone yivahalunani viziva yishtanon alai umilta bilibi nitret. So that's the end of it. That was the end of it. And I, Daniel, my thoughts greatly frightened me, and my face changed. In other words, I was very distressed. I showed my distress, but I kept quiet about it. I kept the matter in my heart. I kept quiet about it. Okay, what are we? Okay, what's going on? So first, let me first go a little bit back before I forget and talk about what Robin was saying before about the question of the two powers. So what I've seen in terms of the question of the two powers is that when it says Va'aru im ananei shemaya kivar enash, and I didn't concentrate on this when we were talking about this, like a person who comes to this being who seems to represent God. And it says he came with the clouds of heaven, right? And then he's given dominion and glory and all the, and it says, and all the nations will serve him, and he's going to be given dominion. Now, so what are the possibilities here? So one of the things that people like to say, I shouldn't say people like to say, but one of the interpretations is that because a lot of times it talks about, and in fact, it's an idea that we have in general in the ancient Near East, that of riding the clouds. It's something that Baal does. Baal rides clouds, but God also rides clouds, right? God, say lahavdil, right? God rides clouds, right? That's when God is and so Rochev Aravot, that whole thing, right? So the fact that this other being, this thing like a person, comes to God riding clouds, and then is given dominion over everything, and everyone's going to serve him, right? That makes it sound like maybe, so is that two authorities? However, if we read the chapter as a whole, the parallel seems to be, and this is where we get to, oh, but is this a person or is this all of Israel? Because the interpretation seems to indicate that the who gets dominion over everything at the end? The nation of the holy ones, right? And the nation of the holy ones is clearly Israel, is clearly the Jews, right? So that's right. So, and then the question is, okay, so this like a person, who is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be the nation of Israel, or is it supposed to be a messianic figure? And like I said, honestly, I mean, a lot of the early interpretation, earlier medieval interpretation said he is a messianic figure. And then one of the questions is, what was the original intent? What was the original intent? Was this supposed to be a messianic figure? This is supposed to be the nation of Israel. Now, I do want to say, before I take questions, I want to talk a little bit about the function of a chapter like this, that's taking decrees that are, and again, so it does have this verse, and absolutely there are people who are like, oh, that verse was added later, but there's a lot of problems with saying that verse was added later, because there are problems with taking out that piece. It seems, so if it's talking about, okay, that there are these decrees that are not letting the Jews keep their laws, okay? So if you're talking about an early decrees like that, what we essentially have Antiochus, I mean, in general, it was a very uncommon thing. It was a common thing to destroy our temple. That wasn't uncommon. It wasn't uncommon to conquer us. It wasn't uncommon to exile us. But up until this point, it was pretty uncommon to say you can't keep your law at all, right? So that was something that Antiochus did. Why did Antiochus do it? There are all sorts of explanations. There's one explanation that you can kind of understand from Second Maccabees. From First Maccabees, it's just like, well, he's an evil Gentile ruler. What are you expecting? He makes decrees that the Jews really can't keep their laws. They're not allowed to keep their laws. When, if you recall, under the Persians, that was absolutely completely fine, even encouraged. So they can't keep their laws, and it's a specific period of 3.5 years. We're going to see it in later chapters. Also, this idea of 3 or 3.5 years. And again, this really fits the decrees of Antiochus Epiphanes. Why would you, so let's take both sides. Why would you want to write something like this that has this thing saying there's going to be this horn, who is this king, and he's going to win against the angels / Jews, right? And then until God puts an end to it, and then the nation of Israel is going to get dominion over everyone. Oh, I like that picture of a horn robin. Nice. Anyone who wants to see a crazy, scary beast with a talking horn on its head, take a look. Oh my God. That is frightening. Yes. Anyway, so if we what I was going to say, yeah. So now I have to remember. Back up. Okay, so why would you want, if you're living through Antiochus's decrees, or even in the initial rebellion against Antiochus' decree, or they're coming to an end, Antiochus died, why would you want a prophecy like this? Why would someone write a prophecy like this? Anyone? What do you get out of it? Well, let's say someone says to me, Miriam, here's a prophecy. Let's say Miriam says I know things are happening in the world, the country, and someone comes to me with a prophecy, says, hey, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, someone has a prophecy, and they named exactly what happened the last 3 years. The last 3 years, they named exactly what happened. And they say that right after this happens, God's going to come, and guess who's going to be on top? You are going to be on top. I'd be like, that is excellent. That is wonderful. And all this crap we're going through now, it's, you know what? It's going to be over soon. Everything's going to be great, right? And also, and especially, and Yael wrote, it shows there's hope for ultimate victory. I agree. Particularly if you're in the middle of a rebellion, if you're in the middle of a revolt, you really want to see a prophecy that says you're going to win, right? That's something that really helps the revolt, especially if you're revolting against a huge power. I mean, it still boggles my mind. I mean, honestly, the whole Maccabean revolt thing, it just boggles my mind. And you would absolutely want to have a prophecy that says, you know what? He's winning. The prophecy said he's going to win for a few years, and after that, stop winning, and God's on your side, and you're with the angels, right? That's absolutely, and you're going to win, and you're going to win, and then you're going to have a kingdom that will never be taken away, right? That's absolutely what you would want to read, and this was a prophecy that gave hope to Jews much later, because the oppression, of course, came back. So Jews in the medieval period, when they were looking at this prophecy, they're like, well, clearly we have not been given like a kingdom that is never taken away. So what does this mean? What is the period is talking about? What is that fourth horrible, scary beast? It is Europe under Christendom. It is other lands under Islam where Jews are tremendously oppressed, and we're being told we can't follow our laws because we're going and being exiled from place to place, and they're trying to convert us and all these things, and clearly, but it's going to end. It's going to end. And it's written in this lovely, it's going to be 1 period and 2 periods and half a period. These could be 100 years. You could have each period be 100 years. You could play with it. It doesn't have to be 3.5 years, right? It leaves you so much room to say, this is what the prophecy was about, right? And this is what it's about, and it's coming. It's going to end. It's going to end, and then God will give us our kingdom, right? Will give us our land, and we will be there forever, right? So that's kind of the power of Daniel, of this part of Daniel, through, as it's interpreted and reinterpreted. Any comments or questions?
Miriam?
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you just take the last section where the holy ones are actually going out and conquering other nations, if this or part of this can be dated to the time of even later, to the time of Yochanan Horkanos, when the Jews are actually conquering other nations.
Well, that's interesting. Let me look at the end of that again here. I'm going to share my screen so everyone can look with me. Okay, so let's look at the end again. So I just see it being given to them. You mean that they're going to rule everything? It says all the other kingdoms will obey them, will serve them and obey them, right? So you can say, oh yeah, make them vassal states, but it also doesn't sound like they're actually supposed to go out conquering the universe. It doesn't sound like, it sounds like the main thing is, if we look at what the main points are, right? It seems like the main point is that vizimna mita umachuta hechasinu kaddish. In other words, when the time comes, the kingdom will be given to the holy ones, and the fourth kingdom will be completely destroyed. That's also a very key part. And then afterwards it says umachuta v'shaltana urevuta dimachavat techot kol shemai hivat la'am kaddish elyonim. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the heaven will be given to the nation of the holy ones of the Most High. Malchute malchut alam, right? Their kingdom will last forever. V'chol shaltanaya leyiflechun v'ishtamun, right? All the kingdoms will serve them and obey them. It's very open. Honestly, you could, if you wanted to make this be part of some nationalistic project, I suppose you could read it that way, because you could just conquer other countries and make them vassal states. So that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to make everyone a vassal state because they're all supposed to serve us. And it could be like, you could say, if certainly with this chapter, you certainly could say, oh yeah, as far as I know, I'll have to look and see if there's any other reason why you couldn't say that, but you could say, oh yeah, this is supporting the Hasmonean dynasty, right? Because there were these decrees and then they ended, right? Except the problem with that is that it sounds like you could read it that way. You could read it that way, and this kingdom will never go away, right? Because that was what was promised, is that the Hasmonean kingdom will never be taken away, and everyone should obey us. It's a little far. It reminds me, by the way, and this is something Al Baumgarten has written about. He argues, and I think he still thinks this way, because people, of course, can change their minds. He argues that one of the reasons there was this apocalyptic fervor towards the end of the Second Temple period was that there were these tremendous messianic hopes from the Hasmonean kingdom, that there was all this expectation that when they won the Maccabean revolt, and when it was all over, it would be this divine kingdom, divine, miraculous, whatever. And however, the Hasmonean kings had their obvious faults, and not everything was necessarily being run the way various sects in the various religious sects wanted. And it wasn't all it was all they were expecting it to be. And because of this tremendous messianic fervor, and they were expecting it to be this amazing thing, so it just created an even greater expectation that, oh, oh, it hasn't come yet, but it will come, right? And but a chapter like this, what we just read, really does sound like as soon as the, let's say, revolt is done, then you would expect, okay, now we're going to be in this like an angelic super kingdom, right? So that was what would lead me to say it probably wouldn't be from like later on in the Hasmonean kingdom, because it would create a lot of, because also the Hasmoneans wouldn't want, I would imagine, would not want a tremendous amount of kind of extreme religious fervor once they're ruling, like what I mean is extreme, like saying this is, no, it's got to be even more. Da, da, da. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. My guess is that this would something like this would be written if it is kind of reacting to the decrees. I would expect it to be written much closer to the decrees, where there's still the expectation that there's going to be something big, right? And it's interesting because, like I said, Al Baumgarten compared it to the 6-Day War. That right after the 6-Day War, there was a lot of expectation that now we're in the Messianic age. So where's the Messiah kind of thing? Like, okay, so where's Mashiach if we're in the Messianic age after the 6-Day War? And then there was a lot of disappointment. So it's interesting, but we're going to keep on seeing this. Our next chapter is actually going to have a lot of parallels to this one, except it will be in Hebrew. And we're going to be looking more and more at these apocalypses as we continue with Daniel. So thank you for joining me. And next week, enjoy the break from Aramaic. We say goodbye to Aramaic and back to beautiful, beautiful Hebrew.